April 18, 1943, the Solomon Islands. Over the lush emerald canopy of Bougainville, the hum of aircraft engines shattered the quiet Pacific morning. In the back of a Mitsubishi G4M Betty bomber, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, Japan's most famous naval strategist and the architect of Pearl Harbor, sat quietly, his uniform crisp, his face calm. The plane vibrated as it cut through the tropical air, flanked by a protective escort of 6 sleek Zero fighters. Yamamoto glanced at his watch. He was punctual as always. The admiral was traveling to inspire his troops. His presence meant to assure them that Japan's empire was still strong. But above the Pacific clouds, death was waiting. At that very moment, a formation of American twin-boomed fighters, the Lockheed P-38 Lightnings, roared low over the waves. Their mission was precise, their target specific: Yamamoto himself. These pilots knew what was at stake. This was not just another combat sortie, this was an attempt to decapitate Japan's naval brain. As the fighters closed in, Lieutenant Rex Barber tightened his grip on the controls, his eyes locked on the bombers above. The moment was approaching. The trap was about to spring. The death of Yamamoto would shock Japanese pilots, officers, and even Emperor Hirohito himself. To them, Yamamoto was untouchable, a god of strategy who had humiliated the Americans at Pearl Harbor. Yet here he was, vulnerable in the skies of the South Pacific. How had it come to this? To understand the drama of that April morning, we must go back to the beginning. When Japan struck Pearl Harbor in December 1941, Yamamoto had been the mastermind. He had warned Japan's leaders before the war. In the first 6 months to a year of war with the United States and Britain, I will run wild, but I have utterly no confidence for the second and third years. He knew America's vast industrial potential, its shipyards, its aircraft factories, and its limitless resources of oil and steel. But Japan's militarists gambled anyway, hoping to crush the Pacific Fleet in a single blow before America could mobilize. At first, Yamamoto's prediction seemed prophetic. Japanese forces swept across Asia and the Pacific in a tidal wave. Hong Kong, Singapore, the Philippines, the Dutch East Indies, each fell in rapid succession. The rising sun seemed unstoppable. Even the mighty British battleships Prince of Wales and Repulse were sunk by Japanese aircraft, shocking the world. The Zero fighter ruled the skies, its agility unmatched. Japanese pilots, trained to near perfection, were regarded as unbeatable. But across the ocean, America was awakening. In 1941, the United States produced around 19,000 aircraft. By 1944, it would produce nearly 100,000 in a single year. Aircraft carriers slid from American shipyards at a pace Japan could not hope to match. Factories in Detroit, Seattle, and California worked day and night. Rosie the Riveter became an icon as women entered the workforce, welding, riveting, and assembling machines of war. The arsenal of democracy was shifting into full throttle. By mid-1942, the tide began to turn. At the Battle of Midway, Yamamoto's own plan to lure the U.S. fleet into a trap backfired catastrophically. 4 Japanese carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, were sunk by American dive bombers in a single day. The loss was staggering. Japan could not replace carriers and trained pilots at the rate America could. Still, Yamamoto pressed on, trying to stabilize the front in the Solomons, where bitter fighting raged on islands like Guadalcanal. It was in this grinding campaign that Yamamoto decided to make his fateful inspection tour in April 1943. Japanese. Morale was waning, supplies were low, soldiers were exhausted. Yamamoto believed his presence could lift spirits. But in war, appearances can be deadly. Unbeknownst to him, American cryptographers had broken Japan's naval code, JN-25. The Americans read Yamamoto's travel itinerary almost word for word. They knew his departure time, his flight path, even the exact minute he would land. Admiral Chester Nimitz and Pacific commanders weighed their options. Could they really strike the mastermind of Pearl Harbor in midair? Would such an assassination be too provocative? The decision reached Washington. President Franklin Roosevelt himself approved it. The mission was codenamed Operation Vengeance. For the Americans, the opportunity was irresistible. Killing Yamamoto would send a shockwave through Japan's military, a psychological blow as devastating as any naval defeat. But the mission would not be easy. Yamamoto's flight path was deep within enemy territory, nearly 400 miles from the nearest American base at Guadalcanal. No conventional fighter had the range to fly there, engage the enemy, and return. Enter the P-38 Lightning. Designed by Lockheed, the twin-engine fighter was unique, sleek, fast, and capable of long-range missions. With drop tanks extending their fuel, the P-38s could cover the distance. 16 of them were chosen for the mission, led by Major John Mitchell. Among them was Lieutenant Rex Barber, whose name would be forever tied to this operation. On April 18th, they took off in the pre-dawn darkness, skimming the waves at low altitude to avoid radar detection. Every man knew the stakes. They were flying into enemy skies with one objective: kill Yamamoto. There would be no second chance. At 9:34 a.m., right on schedule, Yamamoto's bomber formation appeared over Bougainville. The Americans pulled up, engines screaming, and closed in from below. Japanese lookouts were caught by surprise. Yamamoto's escorting Zeros dove to intercept, but the Americans had already struck. Rex Barber lined up on one of the G-4M Betty bombers, the one carrying Yamamoto. He opened fire. Tracer rounds ripped through the fuselage, engines burst into flame, and the bomber shuddered. Witnesses later recalled seeing the plane roll into the jungle, trailing black smoke. Yamamoto, still in his seat, was killed instantly by machine gun fire. His lifeless body was later found by Japanese troops, still clutching his ceremonial sword. For the Japanese pilots who arrived moments later, the sight was horrifying. The man who had crafted their victories, the admiral who embodied Japan's naval pride, was gone, shot down by American fighters that had penetrated deep into their skies. Shock turned to disbelief, disbelief to rage. They had always believed in Yamamoto's invincibility. Now they faced the truth. Even their greatest leader was vulnerable. The loss of Yamamoto was more than symbolic. Strategically, Japan lost its finest strategist, the only admiral who had truly understood America's long-term strength. His successors lacked his foresight. As American carriers pushed forward across the Pacific, Japan's navy found itself increasingly outmatched. At the Battle of the Philippine Sea in 1944, called the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, over 600 Japanese aircraft were destroyed in a single campaign. Pilots who once trained for years were now rushed into battle after only weeks of preparation, their Zero fighters slaughtered by waves of Hellcats and Corsairs. Back in the United States, factories roared. In 1943 alone, America produced $85,000, aircraft more than Japan would produce in the entire war. Boeing's B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-29 Superfortresses rolled off assembly lines. The P-51 Mustang, with its long-range capabilities, soon dominated the skies. Logistics lines stretched across the Pacific, supplying soldiers with everything, from bullets to bulldozers. The sheer scale of American industrial might crushed any hope Japan had of matching it. Captured Japanese officers later admitted their shock. Admiral Ugaki, Yamamoto's chief of staff, wrote in his diary, "The loss of the commander-in-chief is like losing the sun in the sky. We are adrift and our enemies grow stronger every day." Another officer, reflecting after the war, said, "We thought Yamamoto could protect us, but we did not understand the power of the enemy's machines and factories. We were blind." Yamamoto himself had foreseen this collapse. His warnings before Pearl Harbor had been ignored by Japan's militarists, who believed spirit and courage could overcome industry and steel. But the war proved otherwise. Courage without fuel, planes, or ships meant nothing. America's democracy had mobilized its people and its machines into a war effort the world had never seen before. In the end, Yamamoto's death was not the turning point of the war. It was a symbol of it, a reminder that strategy, genius, and daring could not overcome the tide of industrial might. For Japanese pilots who once believed themselves untouchable, seeing their leader fall from the sky was the moment they realized the war had shifted forever. History leaves us with a lesson. Yamamoto's brilliance could not save Japan from a war it was destined to lose the moment it challenged the United States. As he himself had said, he could run wild for a year, but after that, America's power would be overwhelming. The P-38. Lightnings that shot him down were not just planes, they were the embodiment of that industrial and strategic reality. In the jungle of Bougainville, Yamamoto's body was laid to rest with full honors by his men. But his death echoed across the Pacific as a grim testament. Japan had miscalculated, and the empire of the rising sun was now descending into twilight. As the war rolled onward, with firebombings, atomic bombs, and unconditional surrender, Yamamoto's warning remained etched in history. No nation, however daring, can win a war against an enemy whose factories, people, and resolve are united with purpose. And so, the sight of a burning bomber crashing into the green canopy of Bougainville became more than an episode in the Pacific War. It became a symbol of the inevitable. The moment when Japan's greatest admiral met his fate at the hands of America's P-38 Lightnings, and when Japanese pilots, once so confident, finally understood the storm they had unleashed.